I'd like to begin with a question. Do you think it is possible to affect the behavior of a mouse, a regular old field mouse like this one, just by using your mind? My name is Ralph Peterson, and I am a management development coach, and I specialize in working with managers who work in long-term care, nursing homes, and senior care facilities, helping them become more effective. And the answer to the question of whether or not you can affect the behavior of a mouse just by using your mind is yes. And the researcher who figured this out, a guy by the name of Dr. Bob Rosenthal, a behavioral scientist at the University of California, conducted an amazing study with amazing implications. And you're not going to believe this. But what he did was the University of California, they're a research university, so they have all kinds of laboratory mice, like this whole wall full of laboratory mice, all these cages of mice. And what researchers would do, they would do all kinds of experiments on mice. But one of the things they were always trying to figure out was how fast they were, how smart they were, how agile they were. And what they would use is the basic thing that they would use is a maze. They'd put a mouse on one side of the maze and they'd put a piece of cheese on the other, and they would time how long it took the mouse to go through the maze. And that way they could tell all kinds of things about the maze, whether it was very smart or very slow or very fast or very agile or not so very agile. All these outcomes from just doing a maze experiment. And so what Dr. Bob Rosenthal did was he decided to go in. Now he's a behavioral scientist, and so he's interested in human implications, but he's using lab mice to prove a point or to conduct a study on humans. So fascinating. So he took these index cards and he went through and he just labeled all of the mice with all their cages. He labeled them with how agile or how fast they were. And he just labeled them one of three. Either they were above average, they were average, or they were below average. And they labeled every one of the cages, all the mice, above average, below average, or just regular average. And then he asked college students, volunteers, to come in and run an experiment for him. And so they would come in and they would just randomly be assigned a card, and the card would just have a number on it. So the first college girl comes in, she gets number 17. And so her job is just to go find the cage with a corresponding number 17. So she finds 17. And on the card, it says, next to the word number 17, it says above average, meaning this mouse in this cage against all other mice is pretty special. It is above average. And so if you can watch the video, you can see the young lady, she reaches in with both hands and she grabs the mouse and she's like, oh my God, he's so cute. She pets him a little, she brings him close to her and she puts him slowly in the maze. She sets the timer and off the mouse goes. She records how long it takes and then she puts him back in, and the next college student comes in and the same thing happens, except this time they're randomly given the number 31. And so the kid looks at the number 31. He looks for the mouse on number 31. He looks at it. And next to the number 31 on the cage, it says that this mouse performs less than average. It is a below average performing mouse. And you can see this kid, he's like, oh my God, it looks below average. He wraps on the cage. He's like, wake up back there. And he reaches in, he's like, this is so gross. And he grabs it by the tail. He's like, ew, so gross. And he puts it in the maze and he sets the timer and off the mouse goes. And he records the time it takes for the mouse to go through, and on and on and on until every college student is able to evaluate the results from every one of the mice. And then, as you would expect, it turns out that every mouse that was labeled above average performed above average. Like it was super fast compared to all the other mice. And all of those that were labeled below average, well, it performed below average. It was really slow. It took them a lot longer to get started for some reason. And those that were labeled average, well, they really did just average. Here's the thing. Bob Rosenthal, when he labeled the mouse, labeled all the cages, he did it randomly. He did it without knowledge, without any knowledge of whether or not any of the mice were faster or slower or above average, below average, or regular. He just randomized it. So the question is then, how is it possible that he could say that this mouse is above average and it would perform above average? And it turns out mice are very, very sensitive. They're sensitive to sound. They're sensitive to heat. They're sensitive to pressure. They're sensitive to all those things. So the more delicately you handle a mouse, the more comfortable the mouse is the more comfortable the mouse will feel, the better it will do in a test. Whereas the more aggressive you handle a mouse and the loud and you're knocking on the cage and you're like, oh, it looks like a dumb mouse, the less likely the mouse will be able to perform well. Meaning, if your perception of the mouse is positive and that it is a really fast, above average performing mouse, you're going to get a very fast performing mouse. If your thoughts are going in that mouse is super slow, you're going to get a super slow mouse. Now, here's why this is so fascinating. It's because they've expanded this research past mice and they've started doing it to human beings, to parents. If parents have 2 children and the parent says, you know what? I think Ricky is going to go to college, but Mary Sue, I don't think she's going to be good for college. That is, they think Ricky is smarter than Mary Sue. That is exactly how they're going to turn out. Ricky is going to be more successful, going to be smarter, going to go to college, whereas Mary Sue is not. They've done it in the military with runners, where they labeled some runners as slow and other runners as fast, before testing them, before ever having any indication of whether or not they're fast or slow. And turns out the fast runners that they said, the runners that they